What's up, guys? Welcome back to Greetings from Florida. I am your host, Joe Turino, and I hope that you're ready for today's episode because it's the most spookiest time of the year. That's right, weirdos. Today is October 31st, so happy Halloween, blessed Samhain, and because it's Halloween, you know what that means. No, I'm not talking about you stealing all the good candy from your kids' trick-or-treat haul. What I mean is that it's time for us to get into some ghost stories. I'm going to level with you here a little bit. I am pretty damn tired. I was originally planning on recording this episode last night, the 30th. But when I sat down, I started reviewing the outline and everything. I ended up making revisions and ended up writing another 3.5 pages. So this episode is going to be a little thick. Yeah, we'll be getting to that shortly. But before we get started, I am happy to announce that the all-new Greetings from Florida pod merch store is now open. We've got 3 t-shirt designs currently available, including a redesigned version of the podcast and photo collage as seen on the show's cover art. The Greetings from Florida official seal that has the skunk ape and UFO. And for those who like to keep it simple, a just basic Greetings from Florida logo t-shirt. All the t-shirts are available in various color options. And because it's fall, it's starting to cool down a little bit. All t-shirts are also available in long sleeve. I also put out some coffee mugs that are available. They have the same designs as the t-shirts, and they do come in different sizes. So we got you covered no matter how much fuel you require to get going in the morning. So after this episode, head over to our website, www.floridapod.com, click on pod merch, and get yourself some Greetings from Florida gear today. All right, so last October, we visited 3 historic and haunted locations from different cities around the state during our Florida's Most Haunted series. First up was the Pensacola Lighthouse, where we learned about the history of the lighthouse and met some of the spirits that continue to keep watch over the light from beyond the grave. Like Samuel Lawrence, who was keeper from 1877 to 1885. And he likes to grope tourists as they climb up the 177-step staircase that leads to the lighthouse observation deck. There's also Ellen Crawford Mueller, who was said to have bled to death after complications from childbirth. The spirit of her daughter Naomi, who did live a full life, but her spirit returned to the old lighthouse after her death and is often seen in her child form. There was a 7-foot-tall former slave named Thomas who lives in the basement, as well as a ghost named Raymond who lives under the stairs. And there are the spirits of keeper Jeremiah Ingram and his wife Michaela, who got away with murdering her husband and has remained as keeper until her death. They both are said to still haunt the lighthouse. Next, we checked out the opulent Biltmore Hotel in Miami, Florida, where each floor seems to have its own unique tale of paranormal activity, including the 7th floor, which was used as part of the military hospital that the hotel became during World War II. Guests on this floor have reported being awoken by knocks and strange sounds in their rooms, only to see the apparitions of men dressed in hospital gowns looking at them, as well as men dressed in military uniforms roaming the halls. And staff have even reported seeing amputated limbs manifesting from the walls on this floor. The playful spirit of mobster Fatty Walsh is said to play tricks on guests and staff alike in the 13th and 14th floor Everglades suite, where Walsh and a partner operated a speakeasy and casino throughout the 1920s. And this is also where Thomas Fatty Walsh was murdered by his partner. And then we closed out the series with a visit to Ashley's Restaurant and Bar in Rockledge, Florida, where the business seems to have as many ghost stories as it has had name changes. The main spirit here is tied to the story of a gruesome murder of a young woman named Ethel Allen, who was last seen at the restaurant back when it was known as Jack's Tavern, before her body was found near the Indian River. Workers and visitors have reported being tapped or pushed, seeing objects move on their own, and a woman in period clothing in the bathroom area, and as well as by the back stairs that lead into the restaurant's kitchen. That's just, a couple of the experiences. They've seemed to have a lot more going on in this place. This year, we're going to keep going with the Florida's Most Haunted series, but I wanted to change it up a bit by sticking to one specific city and talking about the many haunted locations within it. So this year, we'll be heading to what is considered to be Florida's most haunted city, the ancient city, St. Augustine, Florida. And over the next few episodes, we'll be diving into the over 450-year history of St. Augustine, Florida, as well as the stories of encounters with its many ghostly residents throughout the old city. Now, I want to start this off by saying that out of all the places in Florida that I've had a chance to spend some time in, the city of St. Augustine has to be my favorite. Now, I've lived in Florida for my entire life, but the first and so far only time that I visited was back in 2020, only a few years ago, when my wife and I, along with our close friends Mike and Kat, decided to go for a little New Year's getaway. So, of course, when my wife and I are planning a trip somewhere, especially somewhere new, one of the first things that I like to do is look up the history. Obviously I love the history. It's one of the reasons that this show exists in the first place. So if you're looking for history, there really is no place in the state or even in the entire country like St. Augustine. And when you're walking the streets, especially in Old Town, you tend to look up all around you and find yourself surrounded by buildings that look like they've been pulled right out of a history textbook. I mean, each structure goes back to a different period of the city's long history, which is why there's such a mix of influences when it comes to the architecture found around town. And there's definitely a vibe throughout this town. Almost like every square inch of it has a story to tell and is actively trying to do so. Which brings me to the second thing that I look up, and that is all the haunted historic locations that can be found around town. I mean, come on, I got to check out the local paranormal hotspots and run a couple of EVPs at least. So, that's something that, I love to do. Also, my wife and I are suckers for a good tour. So, that definitely comes with the territory. But this episode, I will be playing the tour guide during our visit to St. Augustine together. So let's dive in and explore the history and hauntings of the ancient city. This warning up top for everyone that's listening. This episode is going to be very history heavy, especially in regards to one of the haunted locations that I'll be talking about today. And that's because without this place, the city probably wouldn't exist as we know it today, if at all. So think about today's episode as a history 2-for-1, because the truth is that one does not exist without the other. And as I like to tell guests during my team's public ghost hunting events, without the history, there are no ghost stories, especially when it comes to locations like this. There will be history over our next few episodes as well, but we'll be getting through a lot of the major stuff today. So hopefully you enjoy. And I promise there will be ghosts. So just hang in there with me. All right. So St. Augustine was founded in 1565 by Spanish conquistador Pedro Menendez de Aviles, 52 years after the discovery of La Florida by Juan Ponce de Leon. Its founding predates the founding of the Plymouth colony by the Mayflower Pilgrims, by almost 50 years, making it the oldest continuously inhabited European established city in the contiguous United States, as well as the second oldest continuously inhabited European established city in a U.S. territory behind San Juan, Puerto Rico, which was founded in 1521. I mean, at over 450 years old, it's no wonder why St. Augustine is often referred to as the ancient city. Menendez was appointed Captain General in 1560 by King Philip II of Spain and commanded the galleons of the Great Armada de la Carrera, or the Spanish treasure fleet, on their voyage from the Caribbean and Mexico to Spain. In early 1564, he asked the crown for permission to go to Florida to search for La Concepcion, which was the galleon capitana, or flagship, of the New Spain fleet, which was commanded by his son, Admiral Juan Menendez. The ship was lost in 1563 when a hurricane came through and scattered the fleet as it was returning to Spain. The crown repeatedly refused his request, but they eventually approached Menendez to fit out an expedition to Florida on the condition that he would explore and settle the region as King Philip's Adelantado, which was a title held by Spanish nobles in the service of the king during the Middle Ages and was later held by some Spanish conquistadors of the 15th, 16th, and 17th century. He was also tasked with eliminating the Huguenot French, who the Catholic Spanish considered to be dangerous heretics. So Menendez quickly agreed, and along with his fleet, he raced to reach Florida before the French captain Jean Ribault, who was on a mission to secure Fort Caroline, which was an attempted French colonial settlement in Florida that's located on the banks of the St. Johns River in present-day Duval County. On August 28th, 1565, the feast day of St. Augustine of Hippo, Menendez's crew finally sighted land. The Spanish continued sailing northward along the coast from their landfall, investigating every inlet and plume of smoke along the shore. On September 4th, they encountered 4 French vessels anchored at the mouth of the St. Johns River, including Ribault's flagship, La Trinité. The two fleets met in a brief skirmish, but it was not decisive. Menendez sailed southward and landed again on September 8th, formally declared possession of the land in the name of King Philip II, and officially founded the settlement that he named San Agustin. Father Francisco Lopez de Mendoza Grajales, whoa, that's a mouthful, the chaplain of the expedition, celebrated the first Thanksgiving Mass on the grounds. The settlement was built on the site of the former Timaqua village of Siloy because of its strategic location facing the waterways of St. Augustine Bay. The former Franciscan outpost, Mission Nombre de Dios, was founded at the landing point, which was just north of where St. Augustine sits today, back in 1587. A short time after San Agustine's founding, the French attempted to attack the new Spanish settlement, but were thwarted by a violent squall that ravaged the French navy. Menendez took advantage of the French fleet's misfortune and marched his troops overland to Fort Caroline on the St. Johns River, about 30 miles north. The Spanish attacked and easily overwhelmed the lightly defended French garrison, which had been left with only a skeleton crew of 20 soldiers and about 100 others. The Spanish soldiers killed most of the men left in the fort, and their bodies were hung in trees with the inscription, "I do not this as unto Frenchmen, but as unto Lutherans and heretics." They spared about 60 women and children. Menendez renamed the fort San Mateo and marched back to St. Augustine. When Menendez and his men returned, they learned from Timucuan Indians that a group of white men were on the beach a few miles south of St. Augustine. So he marched with 70 soldiers to where an inlet had blocked 127 of the shipwrecked Frenchmen trying to get back to Fort Caroline. With a captured Frenchman as a translator, Menendez described how Fort Caroline had been captured and urged the French to surrender, even though he made no promises as to sparing them. Having lost most of their food and weapons in the shipwrecks, the French did surrender. Francisco Mendoza, the chaplain accompanying Menendez, requested the chance to offer survival for those found to be Catholics, but most refused. 111 Frenchmen were killed, only 16 were spared, and these were a few who professed to be Catholic, some impressed Breton soldiers, and 4 artisans that were needed in St. Augustine. About 2 weeks later, more French survivors appeared in the inlet, including Captain Jean Ribault. On October 12th, Ribault and his 134 men surrendered, but this time no Frenchman was spared. And from that time, the inlet was called Matanzas, which means the slaughters in Spanish. And even though these two events didn't exactly happen in St. Augustine proper, they do mark the beginning of the city's bloody origins, as well as the haunted history in general from around the area. Both locals and tourists visiting the site claim that Rattlesnake Island, which is where the massacre happened, is haunted by several of the 245 murdered French Huguenots, as well as by some Spaniards. Apparitions of soldiers dressed in Spanish and French uniforms have been witnessed, and it is said that the waters near the massacre site turn blood red after sunset, as well as the sands of the bay, which give off a reddish tint when it is stirred up in the shallows. Sources also say that local fishermen in the area have reported seeing strange balls of light in the woods of the island, as well as a green light that emerges from the depths of the bay, turning white as it breaks the surface, and then displaying a beautiful face and quickly disappearing. So Fort Matanzas, which was later built by the Spanish in 1742 near the massacre site, is also said to be haunted. Guests to the old fort have reported hearing disembodied footsteps following them as they explore the fort, electronic devices like phones and cameras being drained of battery shortly after arriving, strange lights and dark spots appearing in photos, and one guest even reported her arm being grabbed and pulled so hard that she thought she was going to be dragged away. Now, as you know, I'm a paranormal investigator, and through my many investigations, I have been grabbed, touched, poked, pushed. I've had my shirt and shorts tugged on, and yeah, it's a weird experience. But I myself have never experienced anything so strong that I thought I was going to be dragged away. I mean, I'm pretty sure that if I did, I would probably freak the F out. Now, you know, I wouldn't leave because we don't run from no stinking ghosts. But I'll be honest with you, when you're standing in a dark ass room and you can't see several feet in front of your face, it's a weird and creepy experience when you get touched. But being pulled like that with so much force, that's damn scary in my opinion. Now, years before Fort Matanzas was built, 47 years to be exact, the first permanent Spanish fort was built in St. Augustine in 1695 in order to protect the city from enemy invaders. And throughout its 328-year history, the Castillo de San Marcos, which overlooks the Matanzas Bay, has seen its fair share of battles, sieges, fires, and pirate raids, though it was never breached or taken by force by any enemy. But just because it was never overtaken, that doesn't mean that blood wasn't spilled within its walls. And this is why this iconic fortress is considered to be, by most people, one of the most haunted historic locations in St. Augustine. The need for fortifications was recognized after St. Augustine was attacked in June of 1586 by the English privateer Sir Francis Drake. As we talked about in episode 3 of the show, Drake was returning home to England after his infamous raid on Cartagena, Colombia. He had a fleet of 23 ships carrying more than 2,000 raiders. They were sailing with the Gulf Stream up the Florida coast when they spotted a light burning in the darkness. Upon further investigation, they saw that the light was coming from a military outpost, a Spanish military outpost, of course, that's located on present-day Anastasia Island, which marked the entrance to the St. Augustine harbor. Drake and his men attacked the outpost, and realizing that they were outgunned and outnumbered, the Spanish defenders and townfolk fled into the swamps and marshes, leaving Drake and his pirates to pillage the city of St. Augustine, taking anything of value that they could find before he ordered that the city be burned to the ground. Soon, the settlers returned to St. Augustine and began to rebuild the town. A succession of 9 wooden forts were also built in various locations along the coastline over the next 80 years, but were deemed quote-unquote inadequate after another pirate attack, this time by Jamaican pirate Robert Searles in 1668, which we also talked about on episode 3. Remember Shaba, boy, all that fun stuff. So Searles captured a Spanish ship off the coast of Cuba that was bound for St. Augustine to deliver flour. Holding the crew at gunpoint, they sailed the ship right into St. Augustine's harbor undetected. Searles instructed his men who were hiding below deck to wait until midnight to begin their attack on the unsuspecting city. And when the pirates stormed ashore, they overpowered the city guards and ran rampant through the streets of St. Augustine, murdering 60 people, which at the time was about a quarter of the city's population. They pillaged the public storehouses, churches, and houses, and among the dead were several children, including a 5-year-old girl that was killed by Searles himself. The city was once again burned to the ground, and after this raid, Mariana, the Queen Regent of Spain, approved the construction of a masonry fortification to protect the city. And this is a little sidebar, but according to legend, the ghost of the child that Robert Searles murdered haunted him for several years, causing him to lose his mind. He eventually committed suicide. So, lesson here, don't go around killing any kids, or their creepy spirits will haunt your ass forever, and nobody wants that. All right. So, the construction of Castillo de San Marcos began in October 2nd, 1672, and was completed 23 years later in 1695. The masonry star fort was built using a stone called coquina, which consists of ancient shells that have bonded together to form sedimentary rock similar to limestone. Trust me, this is important later. Native Americans from Spain's nearby missions did most of the labor, with additional skilled workers brought in from Havana, Cuba. The coquina was quarried from the King's Quarry on Anastasia Island across the Matanzas Bay from the Castillo, and then ferried across to the construction site. Walls of the fort ranged from 12 to 19 feet thick in some areas, and a large courtyard called the Plaza de Armas was provided for the people of St. Augustine to take refuge in. The construction proved to be useful and viable as the years went on. English colonial forces set out on an expedition to capture St. Augustine early in the Queen Anne's War. Under the command of Carolina Governor James Moore, and that's Carolina, it wasn't split into two yet, the English laid siege upon the city in November 1702. About 1,500 town's residents and soldiers were crammed into the fort during the siege. The small English cannons had little effect on the walls of the fort because the coquina masonry was very effective at absorbing the impacts of cannonballs, causing them to sink into the walls rather than shattering or puncturing them. The siege only ended after the Spanish fleet from Havana arrived, trapping some of the English vessels in the bay. Knowing they were defeated, the English decided to burn their ships in order to prevent them from falling under Spanish control. And then they marched overland back to Carolina. St. Augustine was destroyed once again as a result of the siege, and reports vary when it comes to how many casualties were on each side. In 1733, a British ship called the Rebecca, that was commanded by Captain Robert Jenkins, was seized in the Caribbean by the Spanish Coast Guard. Suspecting that the British had been trading illegally with Spanish colonies, which was forbidden by both Spain and Britain, the Spanish decided to search the ship. One thing led to another, and a fight broke out between the Spanish and the British soldiers. During the fight, Jenkins had his ear cut off by a Spanish officer, who picked it up and said, "Take this to your king and tell him that if he were here, I would serve him with the same manner." Jenkins and his crew were released, but he reported the incident to British authorities, and the British then used the incident as a pretext to declare war on Spain in 1739. And this war, and I am not joking here, was called the War of Jenkins' Ear. In June 1740, General James Oglethorpe and a British fleet of 7 ships appeared off the coast of St. Augustine. And just as they did in the 1702 siege, 300 soldiers and about 1,300 residents found refuge within the Castillo's walls. For 27 days, the British bombarded the Castillo and St. Augustine. But after he realized that his cannons were not affecting the Castillo's coquina walls, Oglethorpe decided to change his tactics a bit. He decided that he was going to starve the people of St. Augustine. His plan was to blockade the inlet at the Matanzas River, as well as all roads that lead into St. Augustine. However, some supplies were able to reach the city via the river, and with morale and supplies low for the British forces, Oglethorpe had no choice but to retreat. While it is unknown how many casualties the Spanish suffered during the siege, historians have been able to find out that the English reported 122 killed, 16 captured, and 14 deserted. The Spanish would also capture 56 pieces of artillery and 1 schooner. So, point Spain. And even though the Castillo de San Marcos remained intact and the Spanish claimed another victory over their enemies, the Spanish crown decided that they needed a second fort to guard the river, which could be used as a rear entrance in order to avoid St. Augustine's primary defense system. And in 1742, Fort Matanzas was built. Despite various failed attempts to overtake the Castillo de San Marcos, in 1763, the British did manage to take control of St. Augustine, but not by force. You see, British gained all of Spanish Florida as a provision of the Treaty of Paris, which was after the 7 Years' War, in exchange for returning Havana and Manila to Spain. And on July 21st, 1763, the Spanish governor turned the Castillo de San Marcos over to the British, who established St. Augustine as the capital of the province of East Florida by the Royal Proclamation of 1763. And I say East Florida because at the time when the British took over, they also had Florida split between East and West. So think pretty much Jacksonville down, and then everything in the panhandle was Western Florida. So after taking over, the British made some changes to the fort and renamed it Fort St. Mark. The gates and walls were repaired, and the second floors were added to several rooms to increase the housing capacity of the fort. During the American Revolution, the Castillo de San Marcos saw action mainly as a prison, although St. Augustine was targeted by several aborted expeditions from Georgia. 3 United States founding fathers were among the imprisoned in the fort during this time. Following the Revolutionary War, St. Augustine was returned to Spain per their agreement with the Peace of Paris treaties, and on July 12, 1784, Spanish troops returned to St. Augustine. Spain changed the name of the fort back to Castillo de San Marcos and continued to build upon the improvements that the British had made to the fort. However, due to increased pressure from the United States, as well as many other factors, Spain signed the Adams-Onis Treaty in 1819, seceding Florida to the United States, and it was transferred in 1821. Upon receiving the fort from Spain, the Americans changed its name to Fort Marion in honor of the American Revolutionary War hero, General Francis Marion, who was nicknamed the Swamp Fox. Now, little fun fact, sidebar. Mel Gibson's character in the movie The Patriot is loosely based on General Francis Marion. And back in the 60s, Disney put out a miniseries called The Swamp Fox that tells the story of Francis Marion. And the person who played Francis Marion during that series was Leslie Nielsen. Yes, Naked Gun Leslie Nielsen, who is also a Florida resident. So I thought that was a cool little piece of trivia there. The Americans also made a few changes to the fort during this time. Many storerooms were converted to prison cells on account of their heavy doors and barred windows. Also, part of the moat was filled in and transformed into an artillery battery as part of the American coastal defense system. The original Spanish seawall was dismantled to ground level, and a new seawall was constructed immediately adjacent to the seaward side of the original. And a hot shot furnace where cannonballs were heated in fire so that they could be shot at wooden enemy ships was also built in the filled-in section of the moat behind the newly built water battery. Now, while making improvements to the position of cannons on the battlement, the floor gave way under one of these heavy bronze weapons when they were moved to their new location, falling into a room below. The soldiers quickly ran downstairs to find the cannon, but they couldn't locate the room where it had fallen into. Men were then called to excavate a wall where the soldiers believed the cannon fell. And as the men began removing coquina bricks from the walls, and they discovered a hidden room that had been sealed up. And as they continued removing bricks, a strong aroma of roses overwhelmed them. And once they were inside this secret room, they found the cannon that crashed through the battlement. But beside the cannon, they also found ashes, as well as 2 human skeletons that appeared to be embracing each other. And this leads me to possibly the most well-known ghost story from the old fort. Now, there are a few different versions of this story that I've heard, but the players are all the same in every version, so I'm just going to tell it to you how I know it. During the first Spanish period, Colonel Garcia Marti and his lovely young wife Dolores arrived at the Castillo de San Marcos to start a new life. Dolores was considered to be a very lovely young woman, and Colonel Marti was older than his beautiful young bride, but he was an important man and one of great stature. And because of his professional life likely consuming most of his time, didn't leave much time for a romantic life with Dolores. The soldiers at the fort were all enamored by Dolores's grace and beauty. So, being the jealous man that he was, Colonel Marti refused to allow any of the men to become a little too friendly with his young bride. Colonel Marti had a young assistant named Captain Abela, who was more around Dolores's age. Abela was charming and full of life, and Dolores took a liking to him right away, and he felt the same way. A short time later, they began an affair. Now, Dolores was known to be a lover of perfumes, as she applied powerful scents to herself daily and could be smelled at all ends of the fort. Everyone generally enjoyed her uplifting scents. But one evening, Captain Abela reported to Colonel Marti for their daily meeting. But as the two men shook hands, Colonel Marti smelled the strong smell of his wife's perfume all over Captain Abela. Marti became filled with jealousy, and as the night proceeded and the soldiers left for their homes back in town, the colonel let his anger get the best of him. The following day, Dolores and Captain Abela were nowhere to be seen. Both Dolores and Captain Abela were loved by the soldiers of the fort, so after a few days of not seeing them, they began asking questions as to where they were. Colonel Marti told his soldiers that Dolores had become ill in St. Augustine and was sent to Mexico to recover, while the young captain was sent out on a special mission to Cuba. The soldiers found the story to be strange. Dolores, didn't look ill when they last saw her, and Abela would never have left without saying goodbye to his fellow soldiers. But despite their doubts, the colonel's story was never questioned after that. What we found after the floor came in was that he apparently captured both Dolores and Captain Abela, chaining them to the walls of the hidden room, which was said to be an Inquisition-era torture dungeon, sealing it up and leaving the two lovers to starve and spend eternity together within the dark, cold walls of the Castillo de San Marcos. Their ghosts are now said to haunt the room. Guests have reported smelling a sweet, flowery perfume when they're inside, as well as a feeling of being watched. And some have even reported feeling cold hands pressing on the back of their necks while visiting the dungeon. This hidden room is accessible to guests through a crawl space which opens up into a large chamber. But when I was visiting back in 2020 with my friend and fellow paranormal investigator Mike, we tried to go into the room, but it was closed off to the public at the time because of COVID. So what we did was we placed a recorder in the crawl space, because that's as far as we could get, and attempted to do an EVP session. Unfortunately, due to the noise contamination from the visitors at the fort entering and exiting the room, our recordings had to be thrown out. It happens. It comes with it when you're doing this type of investigating, but you better believe that I will be going back to the Castillo next time that I'm in town. Now, of course, the young lovers are not the only spirits that are said to dwell within the walls of the Castillo de San Marcos. Visitors and staff have both reported hearing unexplained noises and loud conversations and the sounds of screams throughout the fort. And some have even felt ill after visiting certain spots. Photos taken at the fort have captured images of misty shapes, as well as strange lights shining in the watchtower on stormy nights. Shadow figures and full-body apparitions have also been witnessed, including Spanish soldiers patrolling the grounds, as well as another who was seen at sunset standing at the edge of the fort staring out to sea. A shadow figure has also been witnessed standing over the moat in front of the fort's sally port, as well as in different areas around the fort's exterior. Now, while I was researching, I came across a very interesting photo that was taken by a visitor during a nighttime tour of the fort. The photo shows the image of what appears to be a man in a Spanish uniform, neck frills and all, holding something, possibly a lantern. And, I know what you're thinking. Maybe it was a tour guide dressed in period clothing. But from, what I was able to find out, as well as what I remember from my visit to the fort, these tours are run by the Park Service. So it's usually a park ranger that gives the tour, and they have to wear a uniform while on duty. Now, I could be wrong, but I don't remember seeing anyone dressed that way when I was there. So to me, this picture looks pretty damn convincing. I think it might be legit. So what I'll do is I will post it to the Instagram page so you can have a look for yourself, and let me know in the comments if you think it's legit or if it's a fake. Now, Spanish soldiers aren't the only spirits witnessed at the fort. The Castillo is also said to be haunted by Native American spirits. And that makes sense to me because the area was inhabited for thousands of years by the Native Americans before it was built on the former Tamaulipan village of Saloy. The fort also served as a military prison and held Native Americans that were captured during the Second Seminole War, which occurred from 1835 to 1842, as well as 500 Apache prisoners that were held there in 1875 after the Indian Wars in the West. And it said that a third of these 500 Apache Indians died while imprisoned at the fort due to horrible conditions. Rhythmic drumming and chanting has been heard in some areas around the Castillo, as well as unexpected drops in temperatures and sudden chills have been felt. And the spirit of a Seminole Indian has been seen leaping to freedom from a high fortress wall. And this leads me to another ghostly tale, which includes the fort's most famous Native American prisoner. Osceola was a Native American leader and member of the Seminole Indian tribe. He was considered to be a cunning chief as he managed to avoid capture by the U.S. military during the Second Seminole War. However, in 1837, he was tricked into custody when he attended a peace conference at the nearby Fort Peyton under a flag of truce, and he was transported to the Castillo de San Marcos along with 200 of his men. The chief had been in poor health before his capture and was suffering from chronic malaria, tonsillitis, and abscesses. And once he was incarcerated, a prominent local physician by the name of Dr. Frederick Whedon was called in to treat Osceola. And the two men became incredibly close during their time together at the fort. Not long after, he and several other Seminoles were transferred to Fort Moultrie in South Carolina, and Osceola died of quince, an infection of the back of the throat, only 3 months after his capture. Surprisingly, Osceola's move to South Carolina didn't disrupt his friendship with Dr. Whedon, as the good doctor continued to visit and treat his friend until his death. But it appears that the doctor had a more nefarious reason to maintain his friendship. You see, the beautiful friendship took a sinister turn when the doctor decided to honor his friend by severing his head and keeping it as a memento. So, before the funeral, while the doctor was alone preparing the body, he cut off Osceola's head and wrapped the cut with a scarf. But he didn't stop there. Besides the chief's head, Dr. Whedon also took some of the belongings that Osceola was supposed to be buried with. In order to preserve the head, the doctor placed it in a large jar with alcohol before bringing it back with him to St. Augustine. Unfortunately, at the time, Native American body parts, especially the heads, were considered to be valuable trophies that people went to great length to obtain, even if it meant desecrating a human being. Many believe that Osceola still haunts the grounds of the Castillo de San Marcos, as strange sightings have been attributed to the chief, with some visitors even claiming to have witnessed a headless apparition roaming the fort. Perhaps it really is the spirit of Chief Osceola still searching for his decapitated head and stolen belongings, but between you and me, I think he may be searching for it in the wrong spot. You see, when Dr. Whedon returned to St. Augustine from South Carolina, he proudly displayed his trophy for all to see on the counter of his pharmacy. This building is still around today and can be visited, though it was moved from its original location back in the 1800s, as it was used as a pharmacy and doctor's office. And it is said that many patients died there while being treated for one condition or another. And this place is claimed to be haunted by many of the restless spirits who took their last breaths within its walls. But we'll be getting into the history and ghost stories of this historic St. Augustine landmark, as well as a few other haunted hotspots around town, when we return for part 2 of our series on the hauntings of the ancient city. And that does it for this episode of Greetings from Florida. Thank you all for listening today to this episode. I really hope you enjoyed it. And stay tuned for part 2 of the series that will be released in the next few weeks. Thank you to Ernesto Paez and his band Modern Mimes for the awesome theme music for the show. Go visit their website, www.modernmimes.com, for links to everywhere you can stream and purchase their music. Check out their music videos, and go check out tour dates and ticket information, band merch, and links to their socials. Go check out Modern Mimes. Also, go check out warpartyparanormal.com. This is where you can find team member bios, links to our team's socials, dates and ticket information to our upcoming ghost hunting event, and links to the War Party Paranormal radio show, as well as to the Haunted Files, which was created by our team leader, Eric Vanderland, and investigator Mike Del Coro. Please contact us if you or someone you know are experiencing paranormal occurrences in your own home or business and need some help. We primarily cover the entire state of Florida, but we can help get you in contact with somebody near you if you live out of state. So hit up www.warpartyparanormal.com for more info. Don't forget to visit www.floridapod.com for show-related news and updates, as well as links to all episodes. Go follow us on Instagram at FloWeirdAPod for photos from this and every other episode. And also go check out the all-new FloWeirdAPod merch store and go pick up a little something for yourself or for that special weirdo in your life. There are 3 designs currently available on all shirts and coffee mugs, but I am working on a few more designs that will be released over the next few months. So keep an eye out for that. And if you've already picked up some show merch, first of all, thank you so much for supporting. I really appreciate it. And it shows me that, you're enjoying what I'm trying to do here. But also, I want to see you rocking your gear. So send me a photo of you wearing your shirt or using your coffee mug, and I will post it to the Instagram page, and I'll give you a shout out on our next episode. Another great way to show your support that doesn't cost you any money is by rating and leaving a short review wherever you listen to the show. It helps other people find the show, as well as you continuing it to share the show with everybody you know. Also, please don't forget to subscribe to the show wherever you listen so you never miss an episode. And if you have any questions about this or any other episode, or have any topics that you want covered on a future episode, hit me up over on the website or at floweirdapod@gmail.com. We'll be back real soon with an all-new episode of Greetings from Florida. But until then, stay weird, Florida. We'll see you next time.